Welcome back to People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. This episode is the podcast for anyone standing at the crossroads of what's next for me, whether that's a career, identity, or how you define success. Today's guest is Stephanie Cordes, a career ownership coach with the Entrepreneur Source, serving individuals across the US and Canada who are questioning whether their current career path still fits the life they want to build. Stephanie is a wife, a mother, and what she calls a corporate refugee, someone who did all the right things, achieved traditional success, and then realized that success no longer aligned with her values, energy, or long-term goals. That lived experience deeply informs her work today. What makes Stephanie's approach stand out is that she doesn't start with options. She starts with clarity. She helps clients define their income, lifestyle, time, and freedom goals first, then uses those goals as a North Star to evaluate every possible path forward. That might include staying in a W-2 role, pivoting careers, investing, exploring business ownership, or deciding that now isn't the right time for a change at all. Stephanie is a free resource to her clients, focused on education, awareness, and discovery, so decisions are rooted in information instead of fear. She's known as an exceptional listener and a steady guide, helping people see options they didn't know existed and make confident, well-informed decisions. I'm really excited for today's conversation because it's not about drastic leaps. It's about intentional transitions. Good morning, Stephanie. Welcome.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me. You made me blush there. Wow, that was amazing. Would you like a job? I could use the help.
Let me get back to you on that, okay? Stephanie, let's jump right in. You talk a lot about clarity coming before opportunity. Why do
Right.
you think that's so important? And what happens when people fail at this and skip that step?
Right. Well, without clarity, people choose good opportunities for the wrong reasons and end up frustrated later. For example, if you pick a new opportunity because, they offer you a 20% increase, well, you might end up where you thought the grass was greener and end up a lot unhappier than where you were in the first place, right?
And have you
So,
seen this play out in real life?
oh gosh, I've seen it in my own life. Absolutely. I mean, you interview for a job a couple times, three times, and you think you know what you're getting into, and then you get there and it's nothing at all like what you thought. The expectations aren't what you thought they were. The work-life balance isn't what you thought it was. I had a job once where I had to interview where the boss told me that, work-life balance was so important. Then you get there and I go to this big team meeting, and it turns out the boss had standing meetings on Sundays. So you never really know what you're getting into when you apply for a new position. So while that big increase sounded great, you never really know what you're getting into sometimes. So, when we talk about clarity in terms of goals, income, lifestyle, wealth, and equity, it's important to really highlight what is important to you across all of those different lanes to get a really clear picture of what you're looking for, because sometimes you assume income is the most important thing, but it's not always the most important thing.
Yeah, I tell people I had a job that I earned a lot of money and I was miserable. And I decided every year they kept giving me more and more money, and I kept getting more and more discouraged. So you're right, money isn't everything. In my intro, we talked about something that you have discussed before, that being the phrase a North Star
Yeah.
when working with clients. Can you help us understand what does that really mean and why do so many people avoid defining it for themselves?
Well, I think a lot of times we haven't been asked what our North Star is since maybe we were in high school. And I look at my yearbook now and they asked us what the goals for our life was. And mine was something silly like, I want to marry the man of my dreams and live in New York City. And I'm from a small town in Ohio. So, pretty silly, heady stuff, right? And so when I met with a career ownership coach like I am now, and she asked me that, I had never even given it a lot of serious thought. My serious thoughts were I need to go to college. I want to have a family. I want to make a good living and provide a good lifestyle. And I think those are pretty common things for people to want. But I had never reassessed that. And as you get older and you start maybe checking some of those things off, your goals shift. So I think it's important for us to take time and reassess what those goals are for the future. And then it's those goals in terms of income, lifestyle, wealth, and equity that you need to reassess and put together your North Star. It's a directional statement that includes those goals that say, where is all this going? What is important to me now? And what I learned when I did that exercise, probably, 4 or 5 years ago, is that I had met some of those earlier goal points for myself. I had finished college, I had a family, but now I needed a work-life balance. When I was young, I didn't care how much I worked, but now I had children. I couldn't spend the time that I wanted with them. I had an income I never dreamed of, so I was very fortunate in that way, but it doesn't do you much good if you're not seeing your family, spending the time that you would like to spend. So I realized I didn't need to make as much money. I wanted to spend more time. I wanted more vacations. The things that were important to me when I was younger were not the same things anymore. So the North Star statement helps you kind of realign your whole life, and it gives you something directional that you can measure any opportunity that you're considering up against, whether that's changing a W-2 job, whether that's looking at businesses you might want to invest in, whether it's looking at investments. Do these align at least directionally with my North Star goals?
And do you think that people avoid defining that for themselves because they're afraid of the answer?
I don't know if they avoid it or they just don't give themselves a chance to do the exercise because we get kind of caught up in, okay, I'm going up the corporate ladder. You can't go backwards. If you're making this much for your family, you become used to making this kind of money. So you can't go backwards, you can't go sideways. How do you take that away from your family? You just feel stuck and frustrated. That's how I felt. And I didn't feel like I had any options. So I didn't go looking for options. I didn't go looking for a North Star. I was just trying to change jobs. I was just frustrated and thought, I'm not going to be any happier. So I'm just going to turn the page, start over somewhere else. I'll be frustrated again soon enough, but I'm going to maintain my income, keep going like I am, and hope for the best. And I just stumbled upon meeting someone who said, hey, let's talk about your goals. What are they? And I was sort of speechless. No one had asked me that. They asked me how much money I wanted. How much more money do you need? But they hadn't asked me, what are your goals for work-life balance? What kind of retirement do you want to have? What do you want it to look like? How active do you want to be? How do you picture that? Retirement, who's thinking about that when they're 40? So, in terms of what do you want that to look like? What do you want the rest of your kids' life to look like with you? What does it look like now? What do you do for fun? No one asked me that.
You've mentioned money a couple of times. Let's talk about motivation. Why is more money really rarely the real goal for people in transition? And what do you think they're actually seeking underneath that discussion of money?
Well, I mean, I think we can't deny that money is important and we all need a certain amount of it. And a certain percentage of people, that is the goal. They don't have enough, and it's hard to think about your wants if you're not meeting your needs. So for some people, it is still going to be important, but I am shocked by the number. Well, I'm no longer shocked. I've learned to, first of all, it was my situation. I realized I didn't need to make as much as I was making in order to meet my goals. And so it's a question that I ask people now, and when I hear the answer, I don't need to make as much as I'm making. I could do with 20% less. I'm not as surprised as I used to be. Let's put it that way. And I remember being in that position Because when people start thinking about it, and people are becoming, I think, more aware of the importance of these different facets of life, work-life balance, and the importance of it, and all of that. I think that people are realizing that money can be a proxy for time, control, peace of mind, and flexibility. So they're really looking for more of those things instead of more money.
Stephanie, you're very clear when you and I have talked that you're not a broker or a recruiter.
Right.
So, how does your role differ from others that might fill that kind of function? And why do you think that that distinction is so important for your clients?
Sure. So I've met a lot of really nice brokers. So it's not about talking bad about brokers. I would say, first of all, so I'm a coach. And so what does that mean? So I don't place people into roles or businesses. I help them decide on which income path actually supports their goals before we even talk about options. We go through and we talk about what their goals are. We create that North Star, and then we talk about the different vehicles of success or income paths. So we talk about, is the right place for them to stay in the W-2 world? And for many people, it is. Other things they could consider to help achieve those goals. They could look into investing in the real estate or the stock market, and I encourage them to do that. And if they're interviewing for jobs, I help them track on that. I want to hear every time we meet, how is that going? What sounds promising? Are you getting interviews? I'm always tracking on that. If they could look at, if they want to talk about business ownership, there's multiple paths. There could be a business down the street that's for sale. They could build a business from scratch. Some people want to sell things on Amazon or Etsy. And then something else they could look at is investing in a franchise. And I do have a number of partners in that space too. But most importantly, what I would say is that I want all of my clients to come to a point of clarity. That is what I coach to, on what is the right income path for them. And for the vast majority of people, it's not going to be business ownership. So, whatever that point of clarity is, whether it's the right thing for me is to stay in the W-2 world after what I've learned through this process, I celebrate that with them. I celebrate everything with all of my clients. If they found the right job for them that meets all of their goals, we're always measuring everything against their North Star statement. So when you look at my reviews on LinkedIn or on Google Business, I think you'll see the vast majority of them are for people that valued their time with me, clarifying their goals and learning about something new, and did decide to stay in the W-2 world, perhaps go a different direction in the W-2 world than where they've been. So I value those reviews, and I just enjoy having all these positive interactions with people, regardless of which direction they go. So I think that makes me pretty different than a broker.
Stephanie, before someone would come to you, they may have experienced a misalignment with what they were doing, with their values, or the season that they're at in their life. Is there a story that you can share with us about that kind of misalignment? And what did that misalignment really cost them?
Almost everyone I talk to is going through some kind of a misalignment. So the stories there are endless. So I can think of a person that I talked to just yesterday who has been in a position for a month, working for a company that has two owners that don't get along with each other. And now he's trying to figure out, what should he do about this. He has been a business owner in the past. He is a property owner. He wants to build the property ownership. He wants the steady income of a W-2. And so he's trying to figure out what his next step should be. That's the kind of person that reaches out to me. I also talk to people who have been in the corporate world for a long time, which would be different than that client, who has been in the same position for maybe 15 years. They realize they don't want to be stuck in the corporate world anymore. They think they have a lot more value to offer the world and want to really be a part of the community, employing people, and are not sure, how to go about that. And if it makes sense for them to start something on the side and stay in the corporate world for a while and have some, perceived security that way and wait for revenue to grow in a side business before they leave the corporate world, or, what are the best options for them. So I'd work with all different kind of clients that are interested in learning about, different types of business models, but first always clarifying goals and understanding what their North Star is.
Stephanie, talk to us a bit about any clients that did choose business ownership or franchising, and how did that clarity up front change their experience transitioning potentially into that ownership or franchising and help them set expectations and develop their long-term satisfaction?
Sure, sure. Well, I have a great story I love of a client in New England last year who was laid off from his corporate position and had moved across the country from California with his family. His wife was still full-time employed, and he was having a hard time finding a new corporate job. And so, he was talking to me while he was interviewing for positions. We looked at a number of different franchise business models together. And I think one of the things I mentioned to you before is one path into business ownership is if there's a business down the street that's for sale, you could look into buying that. And that's sometimes has a lot of benefits to it. It should already have customers, right? Ongoing revenue. And so while he was investigating franchising, it got him interested, and I caught his sign for a business that was for sale in his town. So what he had learned about business ownership in the franchise space got him interested in a business in his town, and enabled him and empowered him to understand more about a business than he had before. And so some of the same work and tools that he had used to validate the franchise business model, he used to validate this business in his town. And he ended up becoming a business owner and buying that business in his town and decided it matched his North Star goals better than the franchise model did in this case. So that's a great story. And then after that, he did also get that corporate job that he was looking for. So that business met his goal. He was going to be required to work full time in the particular franchise model that he was most interested in. Whereas if he invested in this business in town, it still had a manager in place. And so he could manage that. He could manage the manager part time and accept this new corporate job. So everything just lined up and it was fully aligned with his North Star goals. And he was able to also buy the house that he had wanted to buy. So everything just perfectly lined up. So it's a great example of how the education process and looking into franchising didn't lead him to invest in franchising, but empowered his purchase of another business. So I love that story and I was so happy for him.
Stephanie, you talk about readiness for change versus burnout forcing the change.
Right.
How can someone tell the difference between those? And why does the confusing those two leads reactive decision as opposed to going to something?
Oh, yeah, you said it exactly, being reactive. So burnout pushes people to escape. So when I told you that I was ready to just turn the page, just find another job, one that I figured would keep me busy and interested for a while, but I would end up just as miserable, that is burnout. That is reactive. While readiness allows people to choose intelligently and intentionally. So when I met the career ownership coach by chance, she reached out to me on LinkedIn. I said, sure, I'll talk to you. I don't know what this is about, but happy to listen. Her process is intentional, which is my process now. And it forced me to stop, think about my goals, think about what I wanted. And once I had done that, I realized I don't want another W-2 job and I have options. So it took me out of that reactive space and let me think about my different options. And I realized business ownership would be a good choice for me. And so then I intentionally went about pursuing that option. I took myself out of that reactive phase and into a more quiet thinking type phase.
I think that many of my listeners are the traditional W-2 kind
Mhm.
of employees.
Yeah.
What does it look like to own your career without owning a business? And
Yeah.
can you share some examples of people who stayed in those W-2 roles, but redesigned how they engaged with the work that they were doing and the income levels that they were at?
I'm a career ownership coach, and to own your career means you're not just being dragged along by it, which is ultimately what happened to me. My career was dragging me along. I hit pause and I took ownership of it. What was I going to do? So often, I already said the vast majority of my clients do end up staying in the W-2 world. But after working with me, then they own it. They're no longer being dragged through. So I had a great client in Chicago, and she was let go from her position, and she was working with me, and she was interviewing for positions. She was looking at some different business models with me. And, as I said, I track on everything with my clients. If they're investigating, if they're learning about investments, if they're, great, tell me, what did you learn this week? If you're working with a, like a real estate broker, if you're interviewing for jobs, how is that going? I mean, I'm tracking on it closely. So she would be interviewing, and I'm tracking on this with her, and a couple opportunities came and went, and we would measure them against her North Star. I'm tracking on those just as closely as I am on how is it going learning about these different franchise opportunities. What did you learn? What answers are you still trying to find out? Does this really line up with your North Star goals? And, eventually she did end up in the W-2 space, but she found the right position. She didn't hurry to take the wrong position, and she found one that truly lined up with her goals. So I'm really proud of that. I'm happy that she found the right opportunity to meet her North Star goals, that she didn't rush into the wrong thing in a reactive manner. And it was a successful outcome for both of us, that she found that point of clarity and found the right opportunity.
Stephanie, many people believe that career transitions might require burning it all down and starting brand new. Why do you think that that's a myth? And what alternatives do people oftentimes overlook that they don't have to do that scorched earth process?
The process I take people through, it's not a fast process. It takes time. If you are going to really go in depth and look into business models, it takes 4 to 8 weeks. So, or longer. It takes as long as you need it to answer all of your questions. So, it's not a fast process. And I'd say that's another thing that probably differentiates me from a broker. You shouldn't be looking at a business and deciding in 2 or 3 phone calls that this is the one for you. That's a very bad sign. It takes a long time to find out what you need to know. So it's a thoughtful process. And as I said, before we even get to that, we have to sort out your goals and talk about your skills and your business interests. And that takes a couple calls too. So, what I would say is that there are opportunities in business models that you don't need to start full time. There are semi-absentee, or also known as part-time opportunities that you can start. And that's a common approach for people that are a little bit more risk adverse, that do want to see some income built up from any additional revenue streams before they feel comfortable leaving their corporate position, because they want to protect that core income. And that's totally rational. So you don't have to leave a scorched earth, behind you to enter business ownership. Now, there's some models that you do need to start and be present full time, and that's just not going to be for everybody. So, what I would say, even in my own case, once I chose the opportunity that I was going to pursue in the business I was going to invest in, I waited 6 months. I needed to wait for a certain bonus to hit. I was saving money. I was securing, revenue and resources for my family, so that because I had researched so much of the business, I understood what the initial cash flow was going to look like. So, I needed to protect myself and my family. So there's definitely ways to do that through different types of business models, through timing and planning. And my process allows you certainly to, as you're learning, stay in your job, go along with your normal life, and learn about these different possibilities.
Stephanie, what do you think that most people misunderstand about business ownership or franchising? And why do you say it's a vehicle, that ownership or franchising? and maybe not just the only solution?
Well, because everyone has different goals. So franchising works best when it supports a clearly defined life goal, not when it's just used as an exit strategy. So there are, for instance, I have over 250 business partners in 80 different industries. And all of those businesses are making money and are profitable, but not everyone is right. Not every business is right for every person. That's why we spend the time to figure out what are your goals? What kind of work-life balance are you looking for? I was just explaining this yesterday to somebody. There are some businesses where the owner needs to be on site full time, or maybe the owner even needs to take calls in the middle of the night. That might not be what any given person is looking for. Some people are looking for a much more hands-off kind of business. I was just speaking with someone the other day about a very successful franchise where the franchise does require you to be, in person on the retail site 40 hours a week. They're not all like that. There's so many different levels of business types and models and levels of how you need to be involved in the business, the nature of the work. So that's why I spend so much time getting to know my clients so I understand their goals so that if I present a few options, if it makes sense in the conversation, if I present them things to consider and research, I've considered them personally. I don't just throw things against a wall and see what sticks.
Stephanie, there's a huge emotional component to career decisions and career paths. Things like fear and identity and outside pressures. How do you help clients quiet the noise that they're going through and reduce the decision anxiety?
Well, I think information is the cure for fear. So I think that clarity really quiets that noise. And we spend a lot of time. So the whole purpose of the discovery process, if someone were to choose to, do a deep dive and learn more about specific business models, is to answer every question because information really is the cure for fear. And once you've done that, you realize that, going into business in a franchise at any rate, because a franchise has all franchises have manuals, they have processes, procedures, you have initial training and ongoing training and a lot of support. And then through the discovery process, you get to see that for yourself and evaluate it. Is this enough support for me? Do I like these people? You get to talk to other owners and validate all these things that you've heard. So it's a long process. You get all your questions answered and you decide, is it the right fit for me? It's a long, long process. And you realize at the end of it that it's no longer like just rolling the dice. Am I going to fail? Am I going to succeed? But you understand all the levers that are in your control as the business person. You understand what it's going to take to succeed. And it's no longer like rolling the dice. It's an educated decision based on all the information that you've had, all the historical information that they're required to disclose to you. And it's actually, you have a lot more information going into that than you do on any job that you interviewed for. Whether you interviewed two, three, four, 5 times, you know a lot more about a franchise going into it than you do about a job.
Stephanie, have you ever had to say to a client, Bob, I think this business ownership or the franchise opportunity is just not right for you?
I have, absolutely. And whenever I've done that, the client has always agreed as well, because I followed up with, and this is why. Some people don't like structure. So to be successful in a franchise, you have to be someone who likes processes and procedures and structure, and you want to follow a system. Those are the core components of a franchise. So franchising is definitely not for everybody. And that's what some people learn. And that's what some people learn.
If there's one question everyone should answer before making any kind of transition or move, what is that one question that you think that they should be asking?
I think it's what do I want my life to look like and what vehicle truly supports that?
Stephanie, this conversation, I think, really reinforces that transitions doesn't have to be a dramatic to be meaningful, and that clarity is often the most powerful first step we can take. Thank you for bringing such a calm and grounded and practical perspective to a process that can feel overwhelming for so many people. And to our listeners, if you're feeling restless, stuck, or uncertain, today's takeaway isn't to make a move, it's to get clear first. Because when your decisions are aligned with the life you actually want, the right opportunities become much easier to recognize. Stephanie, to help people in that finding clarity, how best to reach out to you?
Yes, the best way to reach out to me is my website, which is my name, Steph, Steph, ahead.com.
Great. And thank you once again for joining us today. And to my listeners, thank you for participating in People in Transition. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.